Welcome to Pop and Politics, a show that highlights trending political news and pop culture. Each week, the ladies get together like girlfriends do to chat about the biggest local and national news stories. They all have varying backgrounds and personalities. One thing they share in common is they all lean on the conservative end of the political spectrum. Meet the ladies. KJ, T, Hanalyn, Shelly E, and Xandria. Smart, edgy, and conservative. This is Pop and Politics. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pop and Politics. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube at Metro Conservative Media. Also, you can find us on all social under the same name, Metro Conservative Media. We are back on today, Wednesday, January 13th. Shelly E is out today, but she will be back next week. But we are excited to welcome our guest co-host today. We have Maryland Congressional District 7 Republican nominee Kim Klacik and Maryland Councilwoman for District 4 Roxy Ndebumadu. Welcome, ladies.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, how's everyone doing tonight?
Good.
Good.
Good. All right. So before we get into the news, we'd like to wish the women of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated a happy Founders Day.
Yes, happy
Yes. Thank you so much to all of the Deltas for your 108 years of service. So I couldn't go without acknowledging that. All right. So let's get into the topics. Xandria, what do you have for us today?
Sure. So last week, I know we talked a bit about the Capitol riots, and actually the events were unfolding as we were streaming. So, I didn't have as much to say then, and I feel like now, I don't know about you ladies, but I have a lot to say. So, I think really social media this week, I don't know, I really had to exercise some willpower to not reply to some of the different posts I was seeing, some of the different news I was seeing, just a lot of misinformation, a lot of honestly malicious posts, and a lot of hypocrisy. And I think that's the big thing and the subject that I really wanted to cover is just the hypocrisy that we're seeing from right now between the media, the leftist outlets, and even, friends on social media in covering the Capitol riots and the BLM riots and then the Antifa riots. And, before we get into the meat of it, I just want to say, of course, I think it's pretty unanimous. I've heard it unanimously across all conservative lines that the individuals that stormed the Capitol, they were in the wrong and they should be prosecuted by the law. And any form of rioting, at least, the way I see it, any form of rioting is wrong, but all conservatives agree that they were wrong. Also, it's really, really sad to hear of the Capitol police officers who passed. One was murdered, one commits suicide, and it's also sad. Anytime there's a death, it's just a sad situation overall. So that was really, really upsetting. But moving into the hypocrisy of it all, just to think that the way the media is framing the incidents and the way that there's a lot to say about the Capitol riots, but nothing to say about the Antifa and the BLM riots. It's really frustrating.
Yeah, it is. And then go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. I think what's so frustrating about it also is not just that people were silent about the Antifa riots, and I'm going to call them the 1619 riots because that's what Nicole Hannah-Jones, who's the managing editor of the New York Times Magazine, what she approvingly called them. So it wasn't just that these riots were met with silence on the left and in mainstream media and in the mainstream Democratic Party. It was that they were outright encouraged. They were condoned. They were celebrated. And if you even questioned the violence that was going on, you were labeled a racist. You were labeled an agent of white supremacy if you were speaking out against the dozens of lives that were lost and the billions of dollars worth of damage to private businesses and the danger that it was placing people in and children in. There were apartment buildings in Kenosha that were burned where people were scrawling on the outside of the buildings, please, there are kids inside. Kids live upstairs, and they burned those buildings anyway. And so the hypocrisy when it comes to the loss of life, when people would not even speak out against it, but they were making excuses for it and they were encouraging it.
Yeah, I agree. I think across the board, political leaders and media mainstream media have been using irresponsible language for a while now. I mean, you go back to Nancy Pelosi, who ratcheted up, the revolutionary rhetoric about calling President Trump and his allies domestic enemies. That kind of talk where you call the people that you are the opposite side of the aisle, those types of names, it's not responsible at all, and it's been across the board. I remember when we had Maxine Waters from California, the congresswoman, who made those incendiary remarks about, you see the cabinet of President Trump, you go out and you make them uncomfortable, find them in the restaurants, find them all over the place, and make them uncomfortable. Don Lemon, he was on air, another media personality on CNN, who was talking about white men, particularly on the far right, are the biggest threat to our country. So we see this kind of stuff across the board in leadership, in mainstream media, these incendiary comments, and it's not good.
Yeah, and there's a group on Instagram, and I think they outlined it well, and they're called Unwoke Narrative, but they actually got their information from MSNBC, CNN, and a number of other locations that we can post later after this. But I'll just kind of draw some, highlight some of the comparisons that they mentioned. So we have the BLM riots that lasted 7 months, and we have the Capitol riot, which was just a few hours. And granted, it shouldn't have happened, but it was just a few hours, right? We have the BLM riots that were condemned by the right parties, the conservative parties. Mm-hmm. And the Capitol riots were really condemned by both. And that's something that even on social media, I saw people in my feed saying, oh, I don't see any Trump supporters condemning the riots. And I'm like, where are you? That's all I've seen, Then the other thing is, like you mentioned, Hanalyn, the BLM riots, they were encouraged by media and by politicians. Pelosi was even saying, I'll walk with them and this and that. And granted, I know there was a component of peaceful protesting as well, but she was really, really promoting and covering for these riots. Mm-hmm. Then, with the BLM riots, we have over 23 people who were murdered. Many of them were shot, fatally shot. With the Capitol riots, Ashley Babbitt was the individual that was unfortunately killed. And then we had a police officer, one police officer that was killed during the riot, and then one that committed suicide later. And then with the BLM riots, we have over 700 officers that were injured, including some deaths. So, you're talking about, I just don't see the left treating the BLM and the Antifa riots the way that they're treating the Capitol riots. And I think that's really, really unfair media coverage.
And every time, conservatives have always come out whenever there is any type of extremist action. So we're talking about, I want to draw a very distinct difference between the masses of people, the hundreds of thousands of people who were out there, who were peacefully protesting and who went down to the Capitol because what President Trump said was that you should go march on Congress, cheer on your brave senators and your congressmen and women, and encourage them, demand that they do the right thing. And you are going to march down there to the Capitol, and you are going to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. So he was very clear in the midst of whatever his other confused rhetoric is. He made very clear calls for peaceful protest, and hundreds of thousands of patriots, of American citizens who were unarmed, right? Because I know during the 1619 riots, there was the focus on these were peaceful, unarmed protesters, and the police were tear gassing them. There were hundreds of thousands of peaceful, unarmed protesters who went down there to protest and make their voices heard, as they should, as is their First Amendment right. And there was a handful of bad actors who went into the Capitol and who were responsible for very bad actions that resulted in death. And everyone on the right, I think, has unequivocally condemned those violent actions. But the right is always being asked to atone and to accept responsibility for the actions of the few. And the left has never been asked to take responsibility for any of the extremist actions that take place in the name of the common good, in the name of the leftist principles of justice. And so you are able to mask so many crimes when you label your opponents as evil, as Nazis, as racists, as white supremacists, as KKK, right? Which is what they have called every Trump rally, whether there has been violence or not. And we know that violence like this has not broken out at Trump rallies, right? So regardless of what happened on the Capitol that day, they would have called it the same thing. They would have called it a white supremacist KKK rally. So on the left, they have never had to take responsibility for when someone answered Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's call to go and to liberate the concentration camps, and an Antifa member went and tried to firebomb an ICE detention center that was actually filled with immigrants that were being detained and ICE agents, and she wasn't even questioned about it in the mainstream media. When there was that shooting on Capitol Hill and a Bernie Sanders supporter went and shot and tried to murder Republican senators and congressmen, the left is never made to answer for any of that. And what we're seeing, the difference on the right, is that, like all of us here have done, is we condemn the violence, but we are being asked to accept responsibility across the board for things that we did not have any part in. And they are doing that as a concerted effort to try to silence our voices and to shut conservatives down across the board.
Yeah, and here goes that monolithic view that they expect from the conservatives. Like, we all supposed to protect, or we're all supposed to stand up for each other, but they don't understand that we're still individuals. Mm-hmm. And we understand that what they did was wrong. We're calling them out, but they still don't want to hear that we're saying this. I don't know. Like, it's again, delusional.
Sorry, I was just going to say, what Trump actually said was, I know everyone will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your votes heard today. That was the first thing he said. Nowhere in there is he calling for violence. And then even later, after, and if you actually look at the timeline of how the events unfolded and the timeline of his tweets, which, by the way, now that Twitter is censoring all of that, right, it's harder to look back and trace those timelines for viewers that want to find out for themselves. But if you actually look at the timeline of the events, Trump's remarks did not cause the violence. The violence was occurring before, or simultaneous, essentially, to the things that he was saying. And he was calling for peaceful protest and specifically said many times, no violence.
Right. And then, the last thing on this topic really is today, we see that the House has moved to impeach President Trump for the second time. And so, based on that, they're basing it on what they're saying is that he incited violence, according to what they're saying. So again, like we have here, they've impeached him, and they're saying that it was because he's incited violence. They're saying some of the things that they said in in the impeachment proceedings was that he presented lies to everyone, basically saying that the election was stolen, the election was defrauded, and people are to go out and do something about it. So, I mean, I feel that his remarks were irresponsible. I don't think it was as far as impeachment. I don't think that he incited violence. I do think that his remarks were very irresponsible as far as the election process is concerned, because basically the Congress that was there, they couldn't do anything to stop the election.
If you're going to impeach Trump for inciting violence, and the standard for incitement under Brandenburg versus Ohio is very clear, it's a very high bar. You have to have a direct call for imminent unlawful action, which Xandria just read his statements. He was exhorting people to be peaceful. But if you're going to impeach him for inciting violence because of that kind of hyperbolic rhetoric, then you would have to impeach every Democratic member of Congress. You would have to impeach Nancy Pelosi for going out and saying that there should be uprisings all across the country. And when Trump was inaugurated, she tweeted out that the election had been hijacked. The Democrats from day one, when Trump was elected, said that it was an illegitimate presidency, that he was not the legitimate president, that people should take to the streets. The news media, MSNBC, actually called for people to take to the streets. So the level of hypocrisy is just mind-boggling. The gaslighting that is going on, where they are trying to paint conservatives with this brush and try to vilify all of us for actions that they themselves are responsible for, is just appalling.
Yeah, I agree. And to move on from there, because we do have we have to move on to the next topic. What do you have for us, Hanalyn? Speaking with you.
Well, we're kind of continuing with, the dangerous narrative that the media is fueling, and I think it's just very important to emphasize it, because lives are being lost. There were over 30, I think it was about 34 is the count of people who were killed in these 1619 riots as a result of the violence, $2 billion worth of damage. So Xandria, that post that you were mentioning from the Unwoke Narrative, you had shared that, Shelly had shared that, I had shared that on Facebook. The reaction that I was getting from people, from liberal and leftist friends of mine, it's an intellectually dishonest and disingenuous reaction, because what they were saying is, well, you have to understand why one set of riots were occurring. And so this set of riots, this riot on Capitol Hill was not justified, but we're going to excuse and justify what happened. And so I think it's important to just look at, well, what is the justification? Because it's based on a false narrative, and it breaks down, and it's extremely dangerous. So you had everything kicked off. I'm just going to run through it very quickly, but you had everything kicked off with the death of George Floyd, right? And there was outrage unanimously across the board, left and right, it didn't matter. Anyone who saw that video was outraged, right? So it was presented, though, without any further evidence coming out, presented unarmed black man murdered by white police, right? So you're already starting with the premise of this racial narrative. You're operating within this paradigm. The whole country is engulfed in flames. Then it comes out later, no, you know what? It's likely he died of an overdose. He had a fatal amount of fentanyl in his system, right? So there are complicating factors here. So then we go on, the country is still rioting. You have the Jacob Blake shooting. So the Jacob Blake shooting. So CNN announces, and all of the major media, they announce that the police, so white police, have shot another unarmed black man while his children watch. And they initially reported that he was shot because he just happened to wander on the scene where there were two women who were fighting, and he was breaking up a fight. So this resulted in 3 nights of riots, 2 people dead. They burned the courthouse. They were burning down apartment buildings with children inside. And it comes out that the man actually, it was a black woman who had called the police on him because he was breaking a restraining order. He had raped her previously and assaulted her. He was there. He was trying to take the children and leave with her vehicle, and she called the police. So you have this false narrative again that is just stirring up this mass hysteria that is leading to more violence. Now
let me stop you right. Let me just jump in there, Hanalyn. Mm-hmm. So what you have, because I saw where you posted that, and people were like, that didn't happen. That's not what happened. Can we all agree? Is that what was reported as to happen in the Jacob Blake scenario? Is there any disagreement on what she just said as far as what the police have reported, what has come out, if you are familiar with it, what has come out as far as what has occurred, what occurred during the Jacob Blake police shooting? Is there any disagreement with that? Because that was something, and again, this goes back to the media's perpetuation of a narrative that is just not true. I don't think anyone understands what actually occurred, what has come out of the investigation with him, and why he was there. He was there
he
because
admitted it.
Right.
Well, really quick, just to backtrack, and then I'll let Hanalyn get back to what she was saying, is that the entire BLM formation of the organization, right? First of all, it's a left wing. It is a political left wing organization, right? It's led by individuals who are self-proclaimed Marxists, and the organization itself was created based on a fallacy, this narrative of hands up, don't shoot. So from the very beginning, from the get-go, this, the organization and the movement, and not everybody that supports the movement is aware of this. That's the problem. Yeah. But I'll let Hanalyn get back to.
Well, because when you say Black Lives Matter, everyone agrees Black Lives Matter, but it's a semantic overload where they're saying, well, if you agree with that, then you also agree with these other claims. And if you say these other claims are not true, then they accuse you of not caring about Black lives. But I just wanted to run down a couple of the rumors where there were actual rumors. What we saw over the summer was a mass hysteria and a social contagion where there were everyone was so amped up, and understandably so. Because if your elected officials and your civil rights leaders and your media are going on the air nightly and telling people that Black people in this country are there's an existential threat, right? And you're being killed, and you're hearing these stories and seeing these videos left and right. Of course, it's going to create this kind of emotional reaction, this kind of paranoia. We saw in Chicago, there were rumors that an unarmed 15-year-old Black boy was shot by police. The riots were so intense that the mayor of Chicago had to draw up the bridges to the city. It turned out the police had shot a grown man who was armed and who was shooting at officers. In Minneapolis, the rioters burned the city again after reports the police had murdered an unarmed Black man who was in custody. The truth was the man committed suicide to avoid being arrested for a homicide that he committed. In Atlanta, and this one was really tragic, this was the Rayshard Brooks killing. It was reported that police killed an unarmed Black man for sleeping in his car. It turned out the man had fought with police to avoid arrest, stole their taser, aimed the taser at them. There was a scuffle, right? There were rioters who burned down the Wendy's. Then they staged an armed occupation with basically the approval of the mayor of Atlanta. And as a result, an 8-year-old child, Cesaria Turner, was murdered because her mother happened to drive too close to the occupied zone. So this is the type of thing. I think that anybody who continues to perpetuate this narrative just for the sake of advancing a political agenda cannot claim to really care about Black lives. And that's how I feel about it.
Not to mention.
Let me jump in really quick because I know the reaction that I get here. I live, in Baltimore City, and so, which is a highly liberal city. And so I get, I know the reaction that I get, but Kim, you travel, across the country. What reaction have you been getting when you talk about the BLM protests / riots versus this Capitol riots, and then the media perception or narrative that's been played out? Do you see any difference or reaction as far as?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to say, first of all, thanks for having me. And this is why shows like this is so important, right? Because if you control the media, you control everything, especially the narrative. And so I think, the media kind of sets it up this way. They immediately jump on a case before any of the investigation is done so that they can spin their own story. That's the whole point of it. And then once the investigation comes out, they're already moving on to the next story. But, things were already burned down and they got their way and they made it look like America is so racist, police are so racist. And, that's the whole point of it. So unfortunately, and this is what I saw with the Capitol Hill. I don't know if you want to call it a riot. I don't know what people are calling it now. I heard so many different words. But, for me, of course, it was mayhem. Of course, I condemn it. Of course, nobody wanted that to happen. But at the same time, if you look at ways that the media portrayed it, if you look at any BLM riot or, the looting, they focus on the police interaction, right? So we know in the Capitol Hill scenario, they had, 7 officers were hurt. 2 of them ended up dying, unfortunately. But if you look at what happened, you never saw really the interaction with police, right? The only thing you saw really was the fact that the police were kind of standing back, letting them do what they wanted to do as far as protests. The same thing that we see in the BLM protests, but the interaction was different. And that way they show certain clips so they can control the narrative, right? And the only reason they get tripped up nowadays is because people have their cell phones and they're taking their own video and sharing it on social media. But if we only left it up to the television and the news, they would show that the police never stepped in. They didn't do anything in the Capitol. They just let people come in and riot. Whereas you look at BLM, they'll show, standoffs. They'll show, even if a cop is just standing there, right? They'll make it seem like the cops and those are engaging the cops and that there's some kind of interaction between the two. So, the media controls the whole thing, unfortunately. And until we do something about that, unfortunately, I think we'll always just look like the bad guys no matter what happens.
Yeah, I agree. And what about you, Roxy? You're down in PG County, right? Bowie. What's been the response that you've gotten there as far as everything that's been going on?
I think the saddest thing for me, and thank you so much for extending an invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah.
The saddest thing for me is seeing a lot of my constituents stare at the television, stare at the CNNs, and see them be further enraged by the narrative that's being perpetuated in our community, which makes it very difficult for me as an elected official to come out and try to bridge that gap, provide that unity, provide that explanation that's not being perpetuated by the media. So it ends up making elected officials themselves look like liars. I don't think that there's anybody on this call that doesn't agree, like you said, that Black lives don't matter. Like, we can all agree that that's a thing. But I think what happens is that the media, because of the way that they're funded, because of the narrative that they're trying to control, because of the way that they want people to think, to continue to manipulate most of our constituents, they want to perpetuate a certain type of angle so that they can continue to foster this division that they're claiming is coming from Republicans. And I'm really, really excited because I think when we talk about the Trump ban and the censorship, I think we'll get into the nuts and the bolts of that. But I think it's very, very clear that the media has always manipulated people and has always made conservatives look like the bad guy, when really, I don't think, for me, I'm going to speak on my behalf. For me, I think it's very clear that there's inequality when it comes to Black communities. I think that's very clear. However, one thing that we can agree on this call is that for years, conservatives have been the ones solving for those inequalities. And Democrats have done a very, very good job at manipulating those communities to further keep them oppressed by perpetuating certain types of narratives and certain types of flaws and policies and holding Republicans to a double standard. When one Republican says something, oh my gosh, they're the worst person in the world, they're perpetuating the division. A Democrat says the same thing. Well, it was warranted. You never know. Who knows? We'll see how that goes, whatever, and so forth and so forth. So I think one thing's clear that we can all agree on is that the media continues to manipulate constituents, further perpetuating the division. And that's the thing that we need to call out. That's the thing that no one's calling out, is the division that's being sold by the media.
Mm-hmm.
And
exactly.
the left's amazing at marketing, right? They are skilled in marketing their story the way they want everybody to remember it. And just going back to the Capitol versus the BLM riots, protests, whatever we want to call it. During the BLM protests, over 150 federal buildings were destroyed in some way, vandalized, attacked. And here we have the Capitol, another federal building, so it's not like the federal buildings were not under siege as well during the BLM protests. So
for 100 straight nights in Portland, they attacked that federal courthouse in Portland. And when Trump said that when he offered to send in federal troops, I had friends of mine like freaking out, going, he's a fascist. He's just like Hitler. He's sending in his jackbooted thugs. But now they want to talk about, they're so concerned about the officers on Capitol Hill that were attacked, when police across the country for months on end were being beaten with bricks. There were concrete dropped from the tops of buildings onto police officers. They were being spit upon in the middle of a They were black police officers had racial insults hurled at them by these white Antifa activists who thought that they were somehow representing black lives by hurling racial insults at the black police officers and calling them traitors and all kinds of derogatory things. So yeah, I don't have any tolerance for the false outrage now that's coming from the left.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw
exactly.
this. I was just going to say there was this great episode on trigonometry, if you guys have seen that, where the hosts were saying, you know, if we wanted to create like a terrorist organization, we should call it Everyone Loves Puppy. And I think that's a lot that's happening on the left, right? You create these names, these titles, and these slogans that nobody disagrees with. The verbiage of those slogans, everybody unanimously agrees, right? But then you put the mission behind them to be something totally different. You know, have any of you guys seen, or do you know any Black individual or Black community member or, you know, Black business that's received any sort of benefit from the billions of donations that Black Lives Matter received? I don't know anyone that's gotten any of that money.
I knew people, I had friends of mine who were actually calling for Black Trump supporters to be murdered because they said they were an enemy to the cause. And that's when you value an ideology more than lives.
These were your friends?
You know, I'm in the poetry circle and they're all crazy and radical. So they were like, they're like, oh, I'm all for Black power and anyone who murders. Because remember, there was that one Black Trump supporter in, I think it was in Milwaukee, who was murdered. And I had a friend of mine who said any Black man who supports Trump is a traitor and deserves to be murdered. And I'm sorry, that's when you are putting an ideology above actual lives.
Yeah, I remember, and the guy who, because I used to be in the poetry circle too. I used to bless the mic. Yeah, I used to do the spoken word and, you know, Warm Wednesdays and stuff like that. So I know exactly what you're talking about, and I felt for you on social media because, you know, these poetry people were coming at you, and I'm just like, hold up, you know, Hannah is my girl. Hanalyn is my girl. So. No, not on my watch. No. Yeah, but again, like you're saying with the false narratives, it's like now they're trying to lump every single person who disagrees with the Democratic agenda with the rioters and the criminals who invaded the Capitol last week, which was a small amount of people. And they're just continuing to polarize. So my question would be then, what can we do? What can we do as conservatives, as Republicans? How can we stop this? I know, you know, like Kim said, and you, Hanalyn, had mentioned about the media and they're putting out these false narratives, but what can we do in our everyday lives? Do you guys have any opinions or on that or advice?
Yeah, it's definitely a fight. We have to fight the narrative, and we have to have the guts and the boldness and the wherewithal to keep going against the narrative or their narrative that they're trying to portray. And, you know, it's been happening for a while. It's just now taking its head, but just got to keep it going.
Right.
I mean, especially in the Black community, it's definitely more of a fight. So just keep it going.
You know what I'm terrified of? The education system. Because a lot of them are very, very liberal, and, you know, they're creating lesson plans. I mean, they're writing the history as we speak and teaching it the way that they want to teach it. So I think there just needs to be more conservative or independent people running for like the boards of education to be able to kind of keep a balance there, because you know that the way they're going to teach the most recent, all of these recent situations just in this past year, you know how they're teaching that in the history books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we have to be strong. I think also we have to make sure that right now they want us to be scared and they want us to be silent. And we need to be strong and bold and just have faith in our own moral conviction that we know where we stand. If somebody calls you racist, or if somebody says you're an Uncle Tom or you're a traitor, you're whatever, but you have that conviction within yourself, you know who you are, don't apologize, because they're going to make you bow down and apologize and genuflect to their agenda. So what we need to do is just have the strength of our own convictions to stand up, to not apologize. And as we all know, Eugene Boykai always says, make them own it. Let them own it, because it is a destructive ideology. They've got the presidency now, they've got Congress, they've got control of cities like Baltimore, and those cities are falling apart. Let them own it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. And so next we have T. You want to move on to what you have there as far as your topic for tonight?
Yeah, sure. The topic has come up for a couple of times already during this call, but censorship. They're trying to silence us and silence our perspective and our voices, starting with the President of the United States. President Trump was suspended. His Twitter account was suspended last week, and here we are with, again, no voice. Frankly, it's still Twitter. It's still social media, and he is the president of the United States. So he does have other platforms that he can't speak from, but it's just an example of how they're trying to shut us out and silence us. And again, we're talking about the fight and fighting the narrative. And not only President Trump, but there were other accounts that were also suspended, and conservative people. And so now here we are. Different companies are starting to get on that boat or get on that train of silencing conservatives. It's definitely not fair, and it's something that we need to discuss, to bring up.
Yeah, and I know go ahead. Mm-hmm.
No, sorry, I was just saying, I think it's really scary, actually, and, we're going to start seeing kind of a witch hunt thing. I mentioned this before, but my mom came from Nicaragua, my boyfriend's family is from Russia. They all left. They escaped communism. That's why they came to America. And it's really scary to see the censorship that's infiltrating our nation, because it started with Twitter, but now you have also Amazon, Google, among others, right? They banned Parler. You have Mozilla Firefox saying that they want to completely change the internet. You have companies like Airbnb saying that they're not going to allow, I guess, housing or whatever during the inauguration. You just have all these companies, right? The next thing is all these companies are going to be turning against Trump supporters or against conservatives. I just saw a video, I forget what airline it was, but two ladies, Delta, okay. Mm-hmm. Two ladies were kicked off the plane for talking about their support for Trump.
Just talking about it.
Crazy. Yeah, that's outrageous. It's really scary.
And I think when you have already, by polling, you got 63% of Americans who are reporting that they are afraid of expressing their political views in public for fear of reprisals. I think that this becomes very dangerous, because I know that people try to dismiss the Twitter ban and the Facebook ban by saying, well, it's just private companies, they can do what they want, or, oh, it's just Twitter, it doesn't matter, it's not real life. But what's happening is you are creating a chilling effect on free speech, because you are creating a culture of repression and censorship, where elected officials like AOC and others have actually been calling for anyone who supported Trump to be put on a list, to be banned, to be fired from their jobs. So you are making it so that people will not be able to live their lives in the public sphere. To Twitter and Facebook operate as, in effect, social media is the public sphere right now. It's the public square. So you are banning people from the public square. You are firing from their jobs. You are preventing them from earning a living. And you're going to create a culture where people are so afraid to speak out. So what you are doing by these coordinated efforts from top down, from major media companies and corporations that are enforcing this kind of code of silence and code of behavior, what you're doing is you're trying to enforce conformity and keep people from speaking out and dissenting.
It's called totalitarianism. They want one political view, and anyone else that opposes it, they try to hush and shut down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And Kim, you have such a large following on social media. Have you experienced any of this censorship or at all as far as your views or anything?
Yeah, so I would say I did have a large following. In the past week, I lost 100,000 people on Twitter. But it dwindles down each day, and it's interesting because I actually screenshotted Mayor Brandon Scott's page and then also Governor Hogan's page. Right, you got an anti-Trumper and then a liberal, and their following's going up while mine is continuing to drop each and every day, which is very interesting. And then people will say to me, Kim, I had to refollow your account because it kicked me off of it. But I guess I try to look at this and I think about the silver lining here. This is kind of what we saw in 2016. I don't know if you guys remember, but they were polling people and they were trying to figure out who wanted Trump and who wanted Hillary Clinton. But they had scared people to even admit that they wanted President Trump, right? So the polls were always skewed because they had, people didn't want to talk about it. Like you said, people don't want to talk about how they support conservatism anymore because they don't want to be admonished about it. And so for me, I'm thinking by 2022, when people are running for the House again, other seats are going to come up. I think we even in Maryland, our Senate seats will be available in 22. I think people are going to vote against this. And so I try to look at the silver lining in it. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that said, you know what, this is not what I signed up for. I don't want to be the silent majority anymore. I am going to say something, or at least I'm going to vote the other way. And so I think, and I'm hoping that in 22, we'll see a huge turnaround. And then hopefully in 24, we'll get the White House back. But I do think we're going to overtake the House because of what they're doing right now.
You see a lot of these companies, you see a lot of these companies saying that, such and such went against our policies and our terms of service, right? Meanwhile, they're modifying their terms of service to be broken by certain people. These are targeted attacks. I think that's pretty amazing, not to mention if we're going to look at, something like Parler where they're saying, oh, the Capitol attack was formulated on here. Well, what about all the terrorist attacks, the Russian attacks through Facebook and all these other social media platforms? The same thing has happened.
And most times it come out to be fake news. Let's talk about that. They have all of these different accusations or alleged stories that come out, and it's fake news. But here we are speaking on our voice and can't be heard.
Well, and how about during the election when Twitter actually shut down the New York Post from being able to publicize stories that the Post was writing about Hunter Biden, and the media, the mainstream left-wing media, they claimed that these were false stories, that they were crazy right-wing conspiracy theories all the way up until the election. They actually censored journalists from being able to report on the news. And then all of a sudden after the election, then CNN and MSNBC and whatever, acknowledged that these were true stories. But so Twitter right now, is it Uganda where they're saying Twitter is all in, clutching their pearls about how they issued this statement about we don't think that, free speech should ever be censored. And we promote and advocate for the free and open exchange of ideas, especially during an election. And you're going, where were you guys 3 months ago when you were silencing journalists in America?
Can I add something? Because I think a couple of months ago, Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey, so I'm going to speak as a technology professional and somebody that's been in corporate America for a while now. A couple of months ago, Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg went before Senate and had a hearing. And during that hearing, it was it was a very interesting hearing. And I think a lot of people didn't understand what was going on.
No, I didn't understand.
People don't understand technology, right? So it was a very interesting hearing. Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg, well, Jack Dorsey in particular, specifically said we apologize for what they did with the New York Post in terms of the Hunter Biden article. They specifically admitted and owned up to their wrongs. If you paid attention to that hearing, I watched it during work. If you paid attention to that hearing, they specifically owned up to it. So it's very interesting how those social media companies and a lot of these tech companies are further manipulating their audiences. There are a couple of things I want to hit on. I cannot, and I've had this conversation over the last couple of weeks of a lot of people who are praising corporate America. Okay, you took a stand. Oh, you're censoring people. Oh, you're blocking people. Hoorah. No, you can't say hoorah because it's modern day manipulation. You're blocking people and censoring people in a time where there's a Democrat-controlled executive branch, there's a Democrat-controlled Senate, and a Democrat-controlled House. Does that not scream errors to you? Does that not scream manipulation to you? And it's a conversation I've had with a lot of my constituents because it doesn't make any sense for you to now just pick now in this moment when there's a new president that's about to come in, that now all of a sudden you want to come to this kumbaya moment and block everybody. It doesn't make sense. What Kim's talking about is absolutely 100% correct. Over the last couple of days, there have been hundreds of thousands of people that Twitter has suspended their accounts and taken them off the platform, as well as Facebook. Now, what's interesting about this concept is that what I want people to understand is there are a lot of things on the back end that control how these things work with technology. Let's take artificial intelligence and algorithms, for example. Algorithms are not biased. The people that develop the algorithms are biased. So if these big tech companies are going to perpetuate a narrative where, oh, we only want to hire liberals, you can only be accepted at bias if we're liberals, then the people that are developing these technologies are going to be liberals, and they're going to continue to attack conservative voices, which is what you saw. During the Senate hearing, Marco Rubio asked a really significant question. He said, are your algorithms inherently biased towards conservatives? Can you give us the numbers of how many conservatives have been knocked off your platform or have been silenced off your platforms, or where the algorithm has suppressed their voices or their content based off of their identification as a conservative? Mark Zuckerberg said that he could not answer that question, and he said he was not willing to provide the data against Democrats versus Republicans. They clearly said that they would not provide that data after specifically being asked for it multiple times. What I want people to understand is what we as elected officials promise is a quality of life and the promise to reach the American dream. That doesn't mean if you're a Republican that you are now being hindered from reaching that American dream. That's not how this works. That's just not how the world works. And what's so frustrating, when you take censorship, and I want people to know, I've talked about this a lot, I'm completely against that. I'm completely against big tech banning the president on Twitter, social media, all of it, completely against it. Because currently, it perpetuates a model where there's lacking continuity. The president has been the exact same throughout his 4 years, completely. So how did you wake up to this conclusion all of a sudden today and say, oh, wow, we got to block this now? Like, right. It doesn't make any sense. There's no continuity there. If you're going to block people, I need you to also block those Democrats who are calling for people's heads to be chopped off. If you're going to block people, I need you to also block those people that are perpetuating sex trafficking in Black communities. If you're going to block people, I'm going to need you to block people who are also calling for acts of violence in African American communities as well, but you don't. You only block the people that identify as conservatives, which further perpetuate an agenda that does not make sense. Now, the argument here, which I think is really, really interesting, is there was one big thing that was up for discussion last week. What was that? Section 230. Now, of course, we all know that Section 230 would have held a lot of these companies liable for many of the things that they're doing today. Now, what needs to happen is we need to figure out as conservatives, and this is an area that we haven't taken up very much, tech policy, because I mean, all of us we're not in the tech arena. We need to figure out and hold companies accountable. Are you going to be a publisher or are you going to be an online community forum? Because you cannot be both when it's secret. That's not how this works. You cannot say, okay, when we feel like it, we're going to play and dibble and dabble as a publisher. But yeah, feel free to express your free speech on our platform. But when it doesn't suit our interest, we're gonna do what we got to do. For the last 4 years, Twitter has made a lot of money off of President Trump being on their platform. They have benefited from it. And so have many of these other big tech companies, which is what I say, modern day manipulation. It has benefited their revenue operating model, their revenue operating model to keep a lot of these voices on their platform. And now that it no longer aligns with their interests and they don't want to be regulated by whatever that looks like on the Democratic side, they're going to say, okay, guys, we're holding conservatives accountable. We know you don't like them, so don't regulate us. Stay away from us. That's just not how this works. We need continuity when it comes to holding these big tech companies accountable so they're not attacking Republicans. So they're not attacking people that identify as Republicans. Because like I said, what did we make? We made a promise to people that they would be able to live out the American dream. The American dream doesn't look different for different individuals. It's the same for all of us. And we all need to be able to reach that dream. I don't care how you identify. There needs to be a space for us all. And corporate America cannot play ball when they feel like playing ball. They cannot accept, all of these things and all these benefits from Republicans when it suits them. But then when the Democrats get loud and strong, okay, we don't play that game. That's a double standard, and it's modern day manipulation that people need to be aware about.
How come people can't see this? I mean, they're brainwashed or manipulated to the point where they really can't see what's right in front of their eyes. And that's the frustrating part when I speak to people on the street, when I speak to my family and friends and just anybody on social media. Like, you really just you can't see this? You can't see what's happening?
I had a people don't understand tech.
I had a poet say to me, I would welcome fascism over free speech, because just for the sake of safety, again, it's that common good argument. For the sake of safety and the common good, we need to. They're cheering on. When you get to the point in a society where you have poets who are supposed to be the ones that speak truth to power, who's supposed to be the revolutionary and the radical voices, and you have poets who are just parroting political propaganda and calling themselves revolutionary, and they're cheering on the death of free speech, you forfeit your right to call yourself a revolutionary. You forfeit your right to call yourself a liberal when you are actually cheering on the encroachment of fascism at the expense of free speech, because it's very easy to say that hate speech is anything that I disagree with. You need to defend free speech when it is something that you do disagree with, because who's going to be there to defend your right to say what you want to when someone says that you should be silenced?
Exactly. And we'll end it on there as far as that topic is concerned. I want to move on to a pop topic, because we are pop and politics, and something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I don't know if you guys are Sex and the City fans, but it was just announced this week that they are reviving the series. So it's going to be on HBO Max. Variety confirmed the new chapter is titled "And Just Like That." It will star Sarah Jessica Parker, Cynthia Nixon, and Kristen Davis. Kim Cattrall, who plays Samantha Jones in the original series, is not returning. So first, I just want to get your guys' reaction. Did anybody watch the series or the movies that came out? Were you guys fans at all?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah, because that was something I followed religiously. Sex and the City. I watched the series. I watched the movies over and over again. But one thing I wanted to kind of touch on, because for those who don't know, it's a series about four girlfriends, and just how their relationships changed. It's about love, it's about friendship, about family, and everything in between, and how their lives revolved around that. And so, again, it centers on these females, these women, and their friendships. And so when they talked about the story this week, that they were coming out with a revival, the media kind of spun it. They, instead of talking about, the movie and the series and all the love and the fans, they centered on the fact that one of the actresses, Kim Cattrall, is not coming back, and she didn't get along with the rest of the ladies, and so they kind of centered on that. Yeah, in real life. The actress, there was some turmoil between them. It was rumored that she didn't really get along with them, but she said she wanted to do something different. But the media kind of really zeroed in on that friction between her and the rest of the ladies. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that and get your guys' opinion on how sometimes, or maybe more than sometimes, the media perpetuates this narrative that women can't get along. We're drama. We bring a lot of drama. We're catty, and so I wanted to get your opinions on that. Is that something that you find? Is it true? You have the whole saying, "I'm a girl's girl," and then you have some people say, "Oh, I don't like a bunch of women. I can't hang out with a bunch of women." So, what do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, I don't really pay attention if the media portrays that, but in real life, it's a mixed bag. You can get anyone. I do hear a lot of women that say, "Oh, I hang around guys, or I was raised around a lot of guys, so I don't get along with women." Personally, I don't trust those women, because how can you not get along with someone that is like you? Women, we're different, but we're the same. So how can you not get along with other women? There should be love all across the board when it comes to women. It's always girl code. There's always, sororities. There's always the sisterhood that we should have no matter what it is. So, I mean, there are catty women. Stay away from them or whatever, but I don't agree that women should be like, oh, I don't like women or something. No, that doesn't work with me personally.
So I will say I never saw the show. I did see the movie. And so I kind of get the concept there. When I saw it come out, I mean, first of all, I'll say everybody on this program today, I think we are friends. So I get along with all of you. But, I definitely see it, running for office. I had a lot of women that would say, oh, she thinks she's cute. That's why she's running, and I'm like, that's not why I'm running. But
you are cute, though.
Yeah, that's what I say. So what? Or I can't be cute and run.
Right.
But I definitely, I hear it. But I think it also comes with, like you guys, you're very secure with who you are. And that's usually what happens, right? Insecure women usually attack other women. Secure women do not. But when I first saw that the show was coming back, I immediately I thought, how old are these women now? I mean, it's like, are they still doing like Sex in the City at like after 50? Because I don't know how much I want that.
I don't want to see a bunch of like these older women running around being single in the city and complaining about men. Do we know, KJ, on this very important point in the midst of this conversation? Very important point for me is is she gonna be married to Big? Because if she's not, if they try to start the show off where like they've gotten divorced or something to try to create some drama, I don't want to have any part in it.
That relationship was toxic. You
didn't want her with Big? Oh, I like Big. Either him or the cowboy. The cowboy guy.
Aiden.
But I don't know. They haven't put out any information.
Yeah. I like Big because he's an alpha male.
I like him for that reason too.
Yeah, they haven't put out any information surrounding what the storyline or anything, but I'm thinking she would still be with him. But I think they're going to zero in more on their friendship and their families. But now, I mean, they're doing that with these shows. A lot of them are coming out with these, older shows, and they're tonguing everybody down.
I mean, I think what? Oh my God. Okay, man. I think the first part that people have to realize is division just sells. Like, it just is what it is. Like, no one's gonna perpetuate it or show a show where there are three best friends who are women who help each other become successful and live happily ever after. Like, that's not a narrative that sells in today's society. I'm not saying that we don't have our flaws and we can't do better to foster that unity among ourselves, but at the same time, when you have ambitious women like Kim mentioned, like, oh, she thinks she's cute, or who does she think she is to be elected? Why does she wear pink? Like, how dare she think she can pop out like that? That's just insecurity that sells, and people thrive off of that stuff. So I think it's just recognizing that division sells.
Right. Also, there are differences in the in-group dynamics between women versus the way that men relate. There just are. I mean, we've talked on the show before about the biological differences between men and women, and psychologically, that's just one of them. Women relate in groups differently. Mm-hmm. We tend to be more passive aggressive with each other. There tends to be more like men, when they have an issue, they'll fight it out. Two guys will, they get into a fight, two friends, and they go out and they have a fist fight, and then the next thing they're laughing over beers. And women, it tends to be much more like simmering resentment, little digs here and there. There's much more emotional manipulation. It just is what it is. And that's not to say all women in all groups, obviously. And I just want to say, I appreciate you ladies so much. You kept me sane this week. So and I love how we're, how our group is growing and our group dynamic. But yeah, there are differences in the way that female groups relate, versus the way that, male groups relate. That I think is fascinating. I think it's one of the fascinating differences between men and women.
But it's also a strength, though. Like, it's also a strength. Like, it's very much so a strength. And that's why women are needed in many positions and needed at the table. Like, it's such a strength.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So at this point, we are at the end of our show. So any last comments, any last Anybody want to say anything before we go? Or
I wanted to say I'm so excited for you guys. I've been watching the episodes and I absolutely love it, and I'm excited to see where this goes. And I know you're going to go far, so this is awesome. Please have me back again because this is fun.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you both for coming, Kim and Roxy. We really appreciate it. And again, it's an open invitation. So anytime you want to cut up with us, definitely come back.
I guess I would.
All right.
I would. I would thank you guys for your courage in a time where it's very unpopular to be a conservative and just say the truth and to share your opinions with the world. I just commend you all for having the courage to keep it going and really educating the community. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So that does it for us today. Thank you for hanging out with us.
The cat wanted to be.
Oh, what?
The cat wanted to be a guest as well.
Yeah. The seventh co-host. Oh. All right. So again, thank you for hanging out with us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Wishing you warm days and starry nights. Good night.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.